Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled at the edge of a grand kingdom, there lived a gentle and kind-hearted girl named Cinderella. From the moment she was born, she radiated warmth, like sunshine spilling into a cold room. Everyone who met her was drawn to her smile, a smile that seemed to whisper, "The world is still good, even when it feels cruel." But Cinderella's life was far from easy. After losing her beloved mother, her father remarried, hoping to give her a family again. Sadly, this decision brought more sorrow than joy. Her new stepmother was cold and calculating, and her two stepsisters, though beautiful on the outside, carried hearts filled with envy. They looked at Cinderella's kindness as weakness, and they treated her not as a sister, but as a servant. Her days became filled with endless chores, scrubbing floors until her knees ached, cooking meals she was never invited to share, and sewing dresses that only her stepsisters would wear. The house that once echoed with laughter now echoed with demands and insults. Yet, through it all, Cinderella never allowed bitterness to take root in her heart. She chose kindness, even when it was not returned. And so, people in the village began to notice her. The baker would sometimes sneak her a fresh roll, warm from the oven. The old gardener would smile at her and whisper, "Keep your spirit strong, child." Even the stray cats followed her around, as if they, too, sensed the purity of her heart. But behind her smile, Cinderella sometimes wondered, was she destined to live like this forever? One bright morning, a messenger rode through the village, his trumpet sounding proudly. He pinned a golden notice on the square's board. Curious villagers gathered around, and soon the news spread like wildfire. The king had announced a grand ball at the royal palace. The prince himself would be in attendance, searching for someone with whom he might share his future. Every maiden in the kingdom was invited, rich or poor, noble or commoner. It was to be a night of music, dancing, and dreams. When Cinderella heard the news, her heart fluttered. She had never been to such a gathering, never even imagined herself stepping foot inside the palace. For a moment, she allowed herself to dream, to see herself twirling under chandeliers, wearing a gown that shimmered like stars. But her stepmother quickly crushed that hope. "You, at the ball," she sneered. "Don't be foolish, girl. Stay behind and finish the work. You wouldn't fit in among nobles." Her stepsisters giggled cruelly, already planning what gowns and jewels they would wear. Still, Cinderella whispered softly to herself, "Why not me?" The days leading up to the ball were filled with frenzy. The stepsisters shrieked for alterations on their dresses, demanded fancy ribbons, and spilled perfumes across their rooms. Cinderella worked tirelessly, stitching hems and polishing shoes, her fingers raw from the effort. But in her spare moments, she secretly gathered scraps of fabric, pieces too small for her stepsisters to care about. With thread and hope, she began to sew a gown of her own. Each stitch carried a silent prayer, "Let me have this one chance, just one evening to feel alive again." On the evening of the ball, Cinderella presented her finished dress. It was simple compared to her stepsisters' gowns, yet elegant, shimmering softly in the candlelight. She had tied a ribbon in her hair and polished her shoes until they sparkled faintly. When her stepsisters saw her, they gasped. "You dare to make yourself pretty?" One hissed, "Where did you get that dress?" The other demanded, tugging at the sleeves. Before Cinderella could protest, they tore at her gown. The fabric ripped under their jealous hands, leaving her standing in tatters. Laughter echoed as they swept out the door with their mother, leaving Cinderella behind in despair. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly broken. She ran to the garden, tears streaming down her cheeks. She whispered into the night, "Why must kindness always lose?" From the shadows of the garden, a gentle glow began to shimmer. Cinderella blinked through her tears and gasped. Standing before her was a woman unlike any she had ever seen. Her presence was calming, her eyes filled with wisdom, her hands glowing faintly like starlight. "Child," the woman said softly, "why do you weep?" Cinderella bowed her head. "I only wanted to go to the ball, to see the palace, to feel like I belonged, just for one night." The woman smiled kindly. "And you shall, for you have more goodness in your heart than those who try to break it. I am your fairy godmother, and tonight, you will not be left behind." With a flick of her wand, the garden came alive. Pumpkins grew golden and enormous, then transformed into a glittering carriage. Mice scurried into its path, and in a twirl of magic, they became fine horses. A rat became the driver, laced in a coachman's uniform, and the lizards along the wall turned into footmen. Finally, with a sweep of her wand, Cinderella's torn dress mended itself, changing into the most breathtaking gown she had ever seen. It shimmered with silver and light, flowing like moonbeams. On her feet appeared delicate glass slippers that sparkled brighter than diamonds. Cinderella gasped. "It's beautiful, but why me?" Her fairy godmother touched her cheek. "Because you never stopped believing in kindness, even when the world was unkind. Now go, my child. But remember, the magic will last only until midnight." The palace was more magnificent than anything Cinderella could have imagined. Crystal chandeliers glowed, music filled the halls, and laughter rang in the air. As she entered, heads turned. The guests whispered in awe, unable to place her. She seemed like a vision, someone who had stepped out of a dream. The prince, who had already grown weary of shallow compliments from noble ladies, noticed her immediately. Something about the way she carried herself, graceful, but humble, pulled him across the room. "May I have this dance?" he asked, bowing slightly. Cinderella, her heart pounding, placed her hand in his. And when they danced, the world seemed to vanish. No cruel words, no heavy chores, no loneliness, only music, light, and the feeling of being truly seen. The prince leaned closer and whispered, "I don't even know your name, but it feels as though I've been waiting for you all my life." Cinderella smiled, though her heart trembled. For the first time, someone saw her not as a servant, but as someone worth cherishing. But time, as always, is merciless. The great clock began to chime, dong, dong, dong. Midnight. In a panic, Cinderella pulled away. "I must go," she cried. The prince reached for her hand. "Wait, please, just tell me your name." But Cinderella fled down the palace steps. In her haste, one of her glass slippers slipped from her foot, clattering against the marble. She dared not stop. As the clock struck 12, her gown dissolved, her carriage shrank into a pumpkin, and the horses scattered as mice. She was once again a simple girl, barefoot on the cold road, clutching the memory of a night that already felt like a dream. The next morning, the kingdom buzzed with gossip. Who was the mysterious maiden at the ball? The prince had searched the crowd, but she had vanished into the night. All that remained was the single glass slipper. Determined, the prince declared that he would find her. "I will marry no one else. Whoever this slipper fits, she is the one." And so began the search. From castle to village, from noble estates to humble cottages, the royal guards carried the glass slipper, knocking on doors, inviting young women to try it on. Each girl dreamed of being chosen, but the slipper refused to fit anyone. When they arrived at Cinderella's home, her stepsisters nearly tripped over themselves in excitement. One tried to squeeze her foot in, wincing in pain. The other tugged and pulled, but the slipper refused her too. As the guards prepared to leave, Cinderella shyly stepped forward. "May I try?" she asked softly. Her stepmother scoffed. "She's nothing but a servant. Don't waste your time." But the guard hesitated. Something in Cinderella's eyes, humble, yet filled with quiet strength, compelled him to offer the slipper. With grace, she slipped her foot inside. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Gasps filled the room. Her stepmother paled. Her stepsisters gawked. At that moment, the prince himself arrived. When he saw her, recognition lit his face. "It's you," he whispered. Cinderella lowered her eyes, her heart racing. "I thought I'd never see you again." He took her hand gently. "I searched the kingdom for you. Because no one else could ever make me feel the way you did." And with that, the world shifted. The girl who had once been covered in ashes now stood in the light, not because of magic, but because her heart had never stopped shining.